royal princesses just got dragged into the Epstein scandal, and it's happening in the worst way possible. Not through rumors, not through tabloid whispers, but through emails. Messages that allegedly show their own mother bringing them into Epstein's world at the exact moment most people were running as far away from him as they could. And what's making people furious isn't even the idea of a meeting, it's the timing, the tone, the favors being asked, and the way these messages paint a picture that feels less like a mistake and more like someone desperately trying to stay connected to a man everyone already knew was dangerous. Because if these emails are real, then the story isn't just about one disgraced socialite. It's about how close Epstein really was to the royal circle, and how two young women, Beatrice and Eugenie, may have been used as part of that connection. And once you see what's inside these files, it becomes impossible to unsee. So if you want the full breakdown of what was revealed, what it could mean, and why the royal family is suddenly scrambling behind the scenes, make sure you're subscribed right now, because this story is only getting darker. This whole storm started because the U.S. Department of Justice released a massive new batch of Epstein-related files, millions of pages that were supposed to finally put the "what else are they hiding" question to rest. But instead of closing the book, it basically ripped it back open, because almost immediately, officials had to admit something uncomfortable. Thousands of documents were temporarily removed after concerns that some of the releases could expose private victim information. And the moment that happened, people didn't calm down, they got more suspicious. Because if this was truly just a routine transparency release, why would they suddenly scramble to pull pages back? And that's where the online digging began. Not just from journalists alone. Regular people started scanning through documents, looking for familiar names, connections, and patterns that didn't make sense back when the story first broke. And at first, most eyes were on the usual suspects, the billionaires, the politicians, the celebrities. But then, royal names started surfacing again. And what shocked people wasn't just seeing the York family mentioned, it was how casually these documents suggested Epstein still had access, long after the public believed he'd been cut off. And once those emails started circulating, it didn't just put one person back in the spotlight, it pulled two princesses into the blast radius. And the next detail is the one that made people stop and say, wait, why would any mother do that? Here's where the story stops being vague and starts getting personal. Because buried inside these newly resurfaced files are emails that allegedly show Sarah Ferguson arranging contact with Epstein at a time when most people would have wanted their name as far away from his as possible. And the detail that instantly set people off was this. The messages suggest she didn't just meet him alone, she brought her daughters into the room. According to what's been reported from the emails, there was a meeting, described as a lunch, where Sarah Ferguson was with Beatrice and Eugenie, and Epstein was there too. And that wouldn't be shocking if this was years earlier, but it wasn't. The timing is what makes it feel so unsettling, because this was after Epstein had already pleaded guilty in 2008 to charges involving a minor, meaning the danger wasn't theoretical anymore, it was already public. And yet, the emails suggest the relationship didn't end, it continued. And it gets even stranger, because a later exchange reportedly shows Epstein asking if Beatrice or Eugenie could help arrange something most people would never even dare to request: a Buckingham Palace tour. Let that sink in. Not a casual hello, not a friendly lunch, but potential access to one of the most protected spaces in the country. Now, to be clear, there's no proof that a tour actually happened, but that's not why this is blowing up. The scandal is that he felt comfortable enough to ask, and that the reply appears to be positive. And that single detail changes the way people see the entire situation. Because now the question isn't just, did they meet him? It's, how deep did this connection go, and how much was being done behind the scenes to keep it alive? And the more people look at these messages, the more one uncomfortable pattern starts to form. It doesn't read like someone cutting ties, it reads like someone trying to keep a door open. And once you realize that, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. If this is how she spoke to Epstein in writing, what was she willing to do when nobody was watching?
For years, the public was told a simple version of this story, that once Epstein's crimes became widely known, Sarah Ferguson cut him off immediately and wanted nothing to do with him. It's clean, it's easy, and it's the kind of statement that makes the problem disappear. But the emails being discussed now tell a very different story. Because instead of sounding like someone disgusted or alarmed, the messages allegedly show warmth, gratitude, familiarity, even a kind of emotional dependence. And that's why people aren't just shocked, they're angry. One email reportedly thanks Epstein for seeing her and the girls, and even mentions how a compliment he gave her in front of her daughters was one of the kindest things anyone's ever done. That isn't the language of someone who's terrified. That's the language of someone who feels flattered. And it gets worse, because there are also messages that suggest she didn't end the connection at all. She may have been the one trying to keep it alive. In other words, the story wasn't, I cut him off. It was more like, please don't cut me off. And once that possibility enters the conversation, everything changes. Because now people start asking a brutal question. If she was that desperate to stay connected to Epstein, what was she really protecting? Her daughters or her access? And this is where the conversation gets dangerous, because it stops being about gossip and starts being about motive. Why keep a convicted predator in your orbit? Why speak to him like he's a close ally? Why let him anywhere near your family at all? And that's the part that makes viewers lean in, because it suggests something most people don't want to say out loud, that this wasn't just carelessness, it might have been calculated. And if that's true, then the next part of the story becomes unavoidable. Because once Sarah Ferguson is back in the frame, one name comes rushing back into the spotlight with her. And it's the name that the royal family has spent years trying to bury. The reason this story keeps circling back to Andrew is simple. Even when people try to separate the daughters from the scandal, the connection always leads back to him. Because Epstein wasn't just someone they met, he was someone who had access. And the public has never been able to understand how that access lasted for so long, especially after Epstein's conviction became public knowledge. That's why every time new documents drop, the same debate restarts from scratch. Not just what happened, but who knew and who looked the other way. And in the middle of that, Andrew's name gets pulled right back into the headlines, again. Now, it's important to say this clearly. Andrew has repeatedly denied wrongdoing, and past investigations in the UK have closed without charges. But public opinion doesn't operate like a courtroom. It operates like a pattern. And the pattern people see is this. Epstein was convicted, exposed, and publicly labeled dangerous. Yet certain high-profile relationships didn't seem to end the way they should have.
And that's why calls for renewed investigation keep resurfacing, especially when fresh reporting adds new claims or new angles into the mix. Because every new allegation doesn't just raise questions about Epstein, it raises questions about the people around him, the people who benefited from him, the people who stayed. And this is where the story turns from scandal into something darker, because it forces one uncomfortable possibility into the open. What if Epstein didn't just know powerful people? What if he had leverage? And if that's even remotely true, it would explain something that has confused the public for years: why certain connections were protected, why certain doors stayed open, and why the fallout always seems to stop just short of the people at the very top. But the most chilling part is this: even if Andrew never faces another legal consequence, the damage isn't done. Because the people paying the price right now aren't the ones who made the choices back then. It's Beatrice and Eugenie. And the next part of the story is where you see just how trapped they really are. This is the part people keep missing. Beatrice and Eugenie didn't build this connection. They didn't create the scandal, and they weren't the ones exchanging messages with Epstein. But none of that matters once the public sees their names sitting anywhere near his. Because when you're born into that family, you don't get judged like a normal person. You get judged like a symbol. And that's why the palace has quietly treated them differently from the rest of the York fallout. They've been kept close, invited to major family moments, included in the inner circle when other people were pushed out. Not because they're powerful, but because they're useful. They're the one part of the York story that still looks clean enough to stand in public, and the monarchy knows it. Because if the public starts seeing Beatrice and Eugenie as part of the same mess, the damage spreads from one disgraced circle to the next generation, and that's the nightmare scenario. But here's the problem. The palace can control appearances. They can't control documents. They can't control what gets leaked. They can't control what the internet decides to focus on. And once these emails started circulating, something shifted, because the conversations stopped being, "Are they guilty of anything?" and turned into something far more poisonous. Why were they ever brought near him in the first place? That question alone is enough to destroy reputations, even without proof of wrongdoing, even without allegations aimed at them directly, because it plants a suspicion that never fully disappears. And the cruel part is, they can't answer it without making things worse. If they speak out, they risk dragging the family deeper into it. If they stay silent, people assume the silence means protection. And that's why they're trapped. They're the collateral damage of decisions made years ago by people who will never admit what they were really doing. And the scariest part, this isn't the end of the Epstein files. This is just the part the public has gotten their hands on so far. And if even one more email drops, one more name, one more detail, it could change everything all over again. So when people ask why this story keeps coming back, the answer is simple: because it was never really finished. Every time a new batch of Epstein documents drops, it doesn't just refresh the scandal, it exposes how many powerful people were still willing to keep him close, even after the world already knew what he was. And this time, the most uncomfortable twist wasn't a celebrity name or some mystery billionaire. It was the idea that two royal princesses, Beatrice and Eugenie, were pulled into his orbit through emails that read less like a warning and more like a welcome. Not because anyone is claiming they did something wrong, but because the paper trail suggests they were placed near a man they should have been protected from. And once that detail is out there, the damage is almost impossible to contain. Because this isn't a scandal you can fix with good PR. You can't rewrite emails, you can't unrelease documents, and you can't stop people from connecting dots, even when the dots don't tell the full story. That's why the palace can try to keep the princesses close, surround them with protection, and quietly move them through public life like nothing happened. But the truth is, the files don't care, and if more documents surface, this could get even uglier, even faster. So now I want to know what you think. Do you believe Beatrice and Eugenie were innocent collateral damage, or do you think there's more to their connection with Epstein than we've been told? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives like this, fast, direct, and focused on what the headlines don't explain, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story isn't going away, and the next drop could be worse than the last.